Today, for Tone Talks, we are going to be talking about an EQ pedal. This is a request by Sir June Ibasco, fellow admin of Guitarra Study Group on Facebook, which, by the way, you should join if you haven't done so already. And it's a lesson that I think isn't covered a lot, but has a lot of real-world application. Today, I am going to go over 5 different uses of how to use an EQ pedal and where they can go in your chain of effects, your pedals, or even your amp setup. Also, a little disclaimer, I won't actually be using this volume pedal physically. Instead, I'm going to be using a virtual volume pedal using my Line 6 HX Stomp. The reason being is it's just faster and more convenient instead of having to physically change the position of this pedal behind, before, in front of different elements and different things. First up, we have how to change your guitar pickup so that it sounds a little bit more like a humbucker or a single coil if you have a humbucker equipped guitar. This will go very first in your chain before anything else. Right here in the very front, I have a 10-band EQ. What I am doing, I am boosting the lows over here and cutting out some of the highs and also boosting the level to kind of mimic what a humbucker would sound like. So before. After. On the other end, I have my Les Paul. Sounds like this. And with a little bit of an EQ to simulate a single coil sound. Obviously, it doesn't sound the same. They won't sound the same because of just construction differences. But in a pinch, let's say hypothetically you're playing live or you need to record something, why not EQ your guitar so that it kind of sounds a little bit thicker, a little bit brighter? Sky's the limit. Next use case, to use it as a boost pedal. More specifically, to replace something that's like a Klon or a Tube Screamer style overdrive. The reason why a lot of people will use boost pedals is to boost the front end of the amp. Klon and the Tube Screamer are used a lot because they both cut out the low end of your signal. In the case of the Tube Screamer, it does have this like nasal honk to it. That is the way how people like Stevie Ray Vaughan will boost their amps, or even metal and djent guys. If you want to learn more about how to make your own djent tones and a little bit more in-depth about what I am talking about here, I made a video how to get a basic djent tone up and running, similar to Periphery. I'll link it down in the description below. This amp that I'm using, the Kali Rectifier, is based off of Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier, which in my opinion is a popular amp, yes, but the low end is very flabby. It's very tubby. So here's what I mean. Now I'm going to switch it, an EQ that is set kind of like how a Tube Screamer would be set, cutting out a lot of the low end. I'm boosting the mids, especially that, honky frequency, and I'm cutting a little bit of the highs because that's actually what a Tube Screamer does, unless you set the tone. Here's the EQ pedal. So as you can see, it kind of does the same thing. If you have an EQ pedal, it could replace a Tube Screamer if you like using a Tube Screamer as a boost pedal. People like Stevie Ray Vaughan also used a Tube Screamer to boost the front end of their guitar amp. I'm going to do the exact same thing. This is what my tone sounds like. It's a more bluesy tone. Now, with the EQ pedal. So it somewhat accomplishes the same goal. It doesn't feel the same, but again, in a pinch, is just another way of how to use your EQ pedal. The last 3 ways are actually somewhat related. These involve adding an EQ after your main overdrive or distortion tone as a means of shaping it just a little bit more. But let's say I wish it had a little bit more of that, tube screamer honkiness. I'm going to use around like 1 or 2K and 4K, which is your pick attack. 2K and 1K are kind of where that like honkiness lives. 150 or the 100 is kind of where your low end rumble lives. Let's say I want that low end rumble and I want the honkiness and a little bit of pick attack. Before. After. And this works with any effect. The sky's the langit. Number 4 is using an EQ pedal to shape an amp tone. If you have an amp like me, like the Quilter Pro Block 200, for example, it doesn't have your traditional EQ controls. For me personally, I find that problematic. What you can do is you can get an EQ pedal and stick it in the effects loop of your amp. If you stick an EQ pedal after your amp, then you can EQ the amp's tone prior to it hitting the speaker. Let's say I like this clean tone, right? But I wish it had a little bit more low end. I'm gonna go with some of the low end. Before. After. So to me, that sounds more lively. It sounds a bit more polished. Last, but certainly not least, is putting it at the very, very end of your chain, sort of like EQing yourself in real life so that you fit in a band mix even better. I talk about this in a previous episode, solo tones, and also being able to sit in a mix. You do not want too much low end, especially when it is going to be interfering with other instruments. Let's say the opposite is true. We already have somebody covering the high end. We are responsible for having that lower mid-range. We can slightly just cut a little bit of that. And there you have it, 5 different ways on how you can use an EQ pedal. I have something very, very special for my 10th episode, so stay tuned. Okay, maraming salamat guys. Thanks for watching Tone Talks.